This video is intended to be a brief addendum to a video I made a few weeks ago that will be linked in the description. If I had thought of this at the time, I probably would have mentioned it there because I think it adds quite nicely onto it. I would recommend watching that first if you haven't, but if not, here's a single sentence recap. There are going to be 4 battles at the start of the Winds of Winter. 3 of them are in places with what are explicitly called beacons atop tall man-made structures. I think the 4th, John Connington's attempt to take Storm's End, will also involve a beacon on top of the tall tower there. Since I made that video, I came across an extra piece of evidence that I think all but confirms the idea. In chapter 48 of A Clash of Kings, Daenerys Targaryen visits the House of the Undying, and we are bombarded by a whole whirlwind of prophecies and visions. You could spend a several hours long video trying to dissect them all, but I want to focus on just one that appears in the very last tranche of visions shown to Daenerys as she is facing the Undying directly. Some of the visions seem to be the past, some the future, and some allegorical imagery. Among other things, she sees that from a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, breathing shadow fire. The image is pretty immediately striking. I think the smoking tower is probably one of the 4 beacon towers I outlined in the previous video. The beacon atop the pyramid in Marine, the beacon atop the watchtower in the Crossroads village, the beacon atop the high tower in Old Town, or the Nightfire or beacon that I predict will be seen atop the single tower of Storm's End, meaning this refers to one of those 4 battles, or what I think is more likely, their aftermath. We're seeing the remains of the beacon fire still smoking as sort of a visual signifier for when this takes place. It's a way of saying, after this battle, this will happen, in the language of dream images. We already know that at least some of the images are allegorical. They aren't physical glimpses of an actual event that is going to happen in the future, but use dreamlike symbolism to convey a more general idea, like the blue rose growing through the crack in the wall of ice, for example. Now, with the Great Stone Beast taking wing, out of the 4 battles, there's one obvious candidate. The Great Stone Beast taking wing symbolizes John Connington's ascendancy after capturing Storm's End. The griffin, Connington's heraldic symbol, is a pretty classical example of what you would call a mythical beast. Calling it a griffin directly would make it too obvious that he was the subject the moment his heraldry appears, hence the beast. What else can fly but isn't a bird? Only dragons, however, I don't know if you'd really call them beasts in A Song of Ice and Fire. They're a little bit separate from animals, and more importantly, there's no need to call them the generic beast to obscure who the line concerns. There's dozens and dozens of characters present and historic who could be symbolized by dragons, and not to mention the literal dragons. There's only one griffin. Taking Storm's End will be the symbol that Connington's cause is in the Ascendant, and it will be enabled by the smoking tower of the beacon fire. The beast is stone because Connington is infected with grayscale, a disease that literally turns you to stone, yes, but also, metaphorically, Connington has been made into an uncaring, unfeeling person by the years he spent in exile, obsessing over his regrets, and his time in power will likely reflect that. I think the shadow fire he breathes then could be one of 2 things, either the promulgation of disease, sort of like a noxious vapor, or bad humour, as was thought was the cause of disease in medieval times, or perhaps more literally, shadow fire or the black fire represents literally the black fire prince he is imposing on the kingdom. Again, we have a word substitution. Calling it black fire directly would be too obvious. I googled this line of the prophecies, and sure enough, I'm not nearly the first person to think that it is referring to John Connington. In fact, it's probably the theory I've seen most commonly appear in connection to this particular line of the prophecy. So I'm in no way taking credit for the idea. I've linked the Reddit thread that was my first search result below, where it was discussed 13 years ago as an example, but it's by no means the only place where this has been said. There have been a lot of different candidates suggested for this line, however, so I think it's viewing this Connington theory in conjunction with the detail of the smoking tower at Storm's End that lends both a new level of credence. This line of prophecy fits so neatly with what I said in the previous video that it immediately jumped out at me as soon as I saw it. Now, what's interesting about this is that it implies Martin already had quite a lot of the details of the conclusion of A Dance with Dragons, what is now the start of the Winds of Winter, in mind when he was writing A Clash of Kings. I think that only underscores the importance of these interconnected events, and I can't help but wonder if this is at least part of the reason we're seeing these parallels between different things happening in different places across the world, in order to have multiple events that could all be interpreted as fitting the prophecy that has appeared in the previous books. Anyway, that concludes all I have to say on the subject. Let me know in the comments if you agree with my thoughts, or if not, you could tell me who you think the line of the prophecy will refer to.